Hey class, today I'm going to go over all the steps and questions that you could possibly get on your upcoming tests. If you watch this video, it's going to help you a lot, but you still need to practice. So I am also attaching worksheets to practice off, okay? But please don't forget, if you don't practice this though, you will 100% fail. So you got to actually practice this stuff. There's no way to pass it unless you actually practice. That out of the way, let's start off. First off, we have our basic one, which is just the Pythagorean theorem triangle. This will always happen on a right triangle. And the formula is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I will not give you this formula. You need to know this formula because it's one of the most common formulas in geometry. So it's good to remember it also. What's very, very important is that A and B are always the sides next to the right angle called the leg. They're never the opposite side. And C will always be the hypotenuse, which is the one across the right angle. Very, very important. Whether A or B, whatever letter you use, it does not matter. If you call this one A and this one B, like you swap the letters, that's okay. But very important, C is the one has to be the hypotenuse. Using this formula, we're going to solve for each one. So this one, I have to identify first. Okay, this is this, both of these are next to the legs, or next to the right angle, so they're legs. So I'm going to call this one A, I'm going to call this one B. Reminder, A and B does not matter. If I call the 3B, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to rewrite this as 3 squared plus 4 squared. It's going to equal, I don't know what this is, so I could call it C squared or X squared. I'll call it X squared because that's the variable there. With that in mind, I'm going to do some multiplication. 9 plus 16 equals X squared. Both of these are squared. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. 9 plus 16 is 25. Now, most of you guys, I know you're going to make this mistake, so try to avoid it yourself. I'm going to just circle this and say 25 your answer. 25 is not your answer. You still have this square over here. So we have to get rid of it. And the best way to get rid of it, or actually the only way to get rid of it, is a square root. So your final answer here is 5 equals X. Okay. Next one. Let's look at what we have before we even start. Most of these questions is looking what you have before you could even start. I have something next to the right angle, which is the 5, and I have something across the right angle, which is 13. So 5 being next to the right angle is one of my legs. I'll call that A. And the one across to the right angle, my hypotenuse, I'm going to call that C. Again, I could call this A or B, it doesn't matter. But this one must be C. So I'm going to follow this equation. A squared, or 5 squared, plus B squared, or X squared, equals C squared, or 13 squared. I guess if I call this one A, this will be B by default. Again, we do the math. 25 plus X squared equals 169. Minus 25 on both sides. X squared equals 144. Again, you're not done. You have a square, so you're going to have to square root both sides. In this case, X equals 12. Make sure to bring your calculators to class if you don't know how to do square roots or you don't recognize common square roots. But most of the square roots, the biggest one you'll ever get is probably like 225, which is the square root of 15, or has the square root of 15. Okay, this is we're chapter 7.2. This one over here. This right here are the rules. So we learned from the previous page, equal will give you a right triangle, which is good. If C squared happens to be bigger, it's going to be obtuse. And if C squared is smaller, it's going to be acute. So on the test, I'm going to give you 3 numbers and you're going to tell me, is it acute, right, and obtuse? You also need to show me that you set it up correctly. You can't just guess one of the three or you won't get any credit. Very important, the c squared will always be the biggest number. The c squared will always be the biggest number. A and B, again, like the previous page, doesn't matter which one's A, which one's B, but c squared will always be the biggest number. So I see 4, 5, 6. Before I even start, let's do square everything. So I have 16, 25, and 36. With that in mind, I'm going to add the two smaller ones because A and B are the two smaller ones while C is the biggest one, which is 16 plus 25. 16 plus 25 is 341. And here's 36. Now we look at this. Which one's bigger, 41 or 36? It should be obvious it's 41. Because A plus B was the bigger one, this would be an acute triangle. Next one, 3, 4, 5. Again, before we even put anything in order, let's just square it first. 9, 16, 25. All right, we're going to add the two smallest ones. The two smaller ones, 9 and 16, because C must be the biggest one. So that is 25 and 25. Since these are exactly equal, this must be a right triangle. In order to be a right triangle, it has to be a perfect situation. Now, this one is the one you actually have to pay attention to. This is the tough one that you don't know how to do unless you know how to do it. So over here, we have 3 square root of 10 and 2 square root of 3. Again, before we even start, I don't know which one's the biggest or smallest here. So before we even start, I'm going to square all of them. So this one, 3 squared is 9. For this one, the square root of 10 squared, when you square square root, you just cancel the square root, which means 10 and it's just canceled out. So this is just 10. When you square square root, you just cancel it out. Here, this 2 will go onto the little 2 and onto the 3. So while the 1 on the 3 is canceled, the 2 is not. What does that mean? Well, this one will actually be squared, which is 4. Well, this one stays the same, which is 3. So 4 times 3 gives me 12. With that in mind, I'm going to combine some things. 9 plus 10. 9 plus 10 is 19. 19, or 9 and 10 are the smaller ones out of 12. So I combine them. So 19, and this is 12. 19 is obviously bigger than 12, and that's acute. Please don't assume, because I give you, let's say, 3 questions on the test, I will give you a obtuse right and acute. I could give you a double. All right, this one's definitely tough. If you don't know what to do, you're never going to be able to do this. There's actually like 0% chance you can even guess this. All right, so this works because we have a right, what we call a perpendicular. We have a perpendicular line going to the right angle to the hypotenuse. This only works because of that. So these both have to be right angles. That's never going to be like a trick to you. I just want you to know that's why it works. There's 2 relationships we have. We have the leg relationship where we start small, go along the leg, and the whole thing. That also works in reverse. I'll do it in blue. Starting from the middle, the small along the leg along the whole thing. Notice this one does not use the middle line in your math. This one uses the outside legs, okay? Now you're understanding, like, what does that tell me? Well, let me show you an example. Let's make this 4, 9, so x, okay. So the x, or whatever I'm missing, is on the leg over here. The x could be down here too, but we have a leg. This is a leg, by the way. So we're going to have to use the leg formula. So we start from the middle, going towards the information we know or want. So in this case, 4. So the first number I'm putting up is 4. Then go up the leg. So it's going to be 4 over x. Then the reverse. Starting from the hypotenuse, or from the right angle, I'm going to go back down the leg. So it's 4 over x, because I went 4 first and then up x. Now when I come back, it's going to be x versus the whole thing. What is the whole thing here? 4 plus 9. 4 plus 9, 13. So using the arrow, I'm going to go and make what we call a ratio. Now, after you have a ratio, all you do is cross multiply. When there's an equal sign in the middle, you could cross multiply. So 4 times 13 is 52. And x times x is x squared. Remember from our previous pages, to get rid of an x squared, you got to square root both sides. 52 does not have a clean square root, so you could just leave it as a square root of 52. And we're done. So base of this is what the angles or the relationship of the arcs is going to be. And sometimes that's tough. You have to make sure you understand. You go the path, small, leg, leg, whole. That happens when we have something on the outside. When we have something on the inside, so something like if we had x in here or some number on the middle line. If you have a middle line, you're going to go side, middle, then middle, the other side, always the other side. So from the corner, middle, middle, other side. Let's try that. X, 4, 10. Okay. So this one, my 10, is in the middle. It is not here or here. So because it's in the middle, I have to use the middle kind of idea. So what does that mean? I start from the middle, up the side. So 4 over 10 equals up the middle, down the other side. So 10 over x. So from here, it gives me the 4, the 10, that's my first fraction, the 10, the x, that's my second fraction. Again, if you don't practice this, there's no way you can visualize this without practicing. So time to do a little math. I'm going to again cross multiply. So I have 4 times x equals 10 times 10, which is 100. Divided by 4, divided by 4. X equals 100 divided by 4 happens to be 20. There's no squared on the x, so I don't have to square root anything. So it's just x equals 20. Again, I'm going to post a worksheet of this. Practice this. Otherwise, you'll have 0% chance of doing this. Here's the other tough one, which is the special rectangles. This is 7.4. The other ones, each page was each section. So 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, 7.4. These 2 special right triangles will be given to you on the test, so you don't have to put them into your memory. When you look at this, what's important is that you look at what's across. So 45 degrees over here is A. Well, across 60 here is A root 3. I already talked a lot in class about how these are made, so I'm not going to talk about that, how they're made. Just accept this is what it is, and I'm going to show you how to use it in your questions. All right, let's look at the first one down here. This is a 45-degree angle. With that in mind, you could fill in the other angle, which must be 45. If you don't remember why, 90 plus 45 equals 135. Subtract that for 180 would also equal 45, or you could just put that in your memory. Now, before we even start, we're going to identify all our opposite sides. So this should be A, this should be A, and this should be A root 2. With that in mind, so I'll do that first and let's say green. That in mind, this side over here tells me 12 equals A. Since 12 equals A, that means I could put in what A value is here. But since 12 equals A, this must be just 12. In this one, it's A times root 2. But we know what A is. That's 12. So you just plug it in, 12 root 2. These two numbers are your answers. It's that straightforward. The hardest part is you typically just identify what you got. Let's look at the next one. It's a little rotated. Right angle, 45. This one then must be 45 also. Let's identify what our sides are. Across the 45s are A's. And across the hypotenuse is A root 2. So in this one, we have 3 root 2 equals A root 2. I'm going to write it like this. 3 root 2 equals A root 2. Hopefully it's obvious what the A is going to be. But if it's not, what you could technically do is divide both sides by root 2. And we cross out the root 2's. So what's left over? 3 equals A. So your answer for that one is 3 equals A. Are you done? No. Because then you just plug it in. Since this is just A, it is 3. Since this is just A, this is 3. So these two 3's here are your actual answers. You have to fill in those sides. Okay, next one. We have 30. If this is 30, this is a right angle. This must be 60. And I'm going to use this triangle to identify my things. This is slightly different, so make sure you look at the triangle when you're given to it on the test. So across the 30 is A. Across the 60 is A root 3. And across the hypotenuse is 2A. Right. Since we know that, we can identify a couple of things. First off, over here, since 7 is at the A position, that must mean A equals 7, which means I could just take my A value, and my goal is always to find my A value. So my A value is 7, so I'm going to plug it in everywhere. Here is going to be 7 root 3, no math needed. Here is 2 times 7, so I'm just going to write 2 times 7, which means your result is you actually multiply that because they're both normal numbers, 14. Okay, next one. If this one 30, this one must be 60. Again, let's identify everything. So here's A. Let me keep this consistent color scheme. So I use green. So I'll use A root 3. A root 3. And this is 2A. 2A equals 100. Because 2A is over here, right? With that in mind, if 2A equals 100, I need A by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2, which means my result is A equals 50. With that information, I can plug in everything. Here, since this is just A, this is just 50. In here, this is just a root 3, so it's just 50 root 3. Okay. So for this one, because it was 2a, I had to do just one step of algebra to figure out what a was. But once you find a, everything else fills in. The hardest part is typically identifying and knowing how to actually do this. Never mind, that's every skill that you're going to need to know for the test. Make sure you're ready for the test and do your best.